Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If any of the attendees haven't been to one of these online events in the past, as always, we try to get the video uploaded to our YouTube channel sometimes the day of, but at latest the next business day. So I think Monday would be the latest we'd have this loaded up. So if any of your colleagues or anyone else does come in late, they'll be able to access the full meeting. And if you're interested in any of the content and want to come back to it, it'll be up on the YouTube channel. We send that out to anyone who registered on LinkedIn. So just by being in this meeting and having registered on LinkedIn, you're going to get a link to our YouTube channel and be able to watch this entire recording at that time. So happy Friday to everyone out there. Today, I'm actually going to be with Elias Hill. He's been, and we'll get into introductions in a second. I guess maybe just jump right into those. I'll introduce myself and more importantly, give Elias an opportunity to introduce himself because he's the real subject matter expert. But today we're going to be talking about preventing duplicate payments. My name is Ben Evans. I'm a president of Audit Solutions. I've been with Audit for over 5 years. My background's in forensic accounting, CPA with an accounting degree. I live here in Gilbert, Arizona, which is the headquarters for Audit Solutions, with my wife and my 3 little girls. So more importantly, Elias is going to introduce himself. Elias, do you want to kind of give some of your background and some of your street credentials for the duplicate payments topic?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'm Elias Hill. I have been specializing in duplicate payments now for 20 plus years in the field here, and have been, able to have the opportunity to work on, numerous different clients spanning commercial, retail, government, along the way. And I'm here in Salt Lake, remotely working with Audit. I've been with Audit now for about 7 years, and have we've really continued to kind of push and mold the duplicate payment analysis and the audits as I've been here. Really big focus there.
Great. And yeah, I mean, just to toot Elias's horn, I mean, this really is what he eats and breathes from a professional perspective, at least. He really is the expert in this space at Audit Solutions. So he was the no-brainer for us to bring in. So kind of the format, I'm going to walk through, I want to define what we're talking about when we're talking about duplicate payments, although it's technically self-explanatory. Some people have a little bit of a different scope that we would file into erroneous payments, which we're not going to be talking about today, but maybe in a future online event. And then I'm going to turn the time over to Elias to really talk about, to have this conversation about what to do to prevent duplicate payments. I really feel like we need to start with what causes duplicate payments, what types of duplicate payments there are. And Elias is going to walk through that in quite a bit of detail. We've done some prep for this meeting, and I think he's got kind of the expertise to walk us through that. But and then at the end, he'll turn it back to me. We'll discuss some of the methods that organizations of all different sizes use to reduce and prevent duplicate payments on their side. So, which is obviously the title of the online event. So, with that, I'm going to jump in the definition. So, a duplicate payment is an additional payment made to a supplier that has already been paid. Duplicate payments are caused by flaws in an entity's accounts payable process or in their accounts payable processes that do not detect the presence of prior payments. This is the definition we'll be looking at today. We're not going to be looking at an instance where the same payment is made to 2 different suppliers, which under some definitions might be considered a duplicate. We would call that an erroneous payment. But the focus of today's conversation is going to be in instances, where the same supplier is paid multiple times. With that, I am going to stop talking and hand the time over to our expert here, Elias.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. When we look at the root cause of duplicates, where a really good starting point is going to be where situations where we have multiple payable vendor numbers set up for the same company. And from a recovery standpoint, this is probably one of our most prevalent areas of recoveries. So this is a scenario where one vendor has more than one, and it can be multiple different vendor numbers in the system. And, we've seen this occur for reasons like, acquisitions along the way, situations where different department codes the vendors as separate entities, manifesting in multiple entries there. And sometimes even the vendor themselves will, operate in that fashion where they actually have different vendor numbers for different divisions or different departments. This is always a very good thing with respect to duplicate payments, because invoices will be submitted under the correct invoice number and then under the other invoice number that's available to use. This happens quite often when this is the case. It's very hard to find these in a system to stop these from like an edit perspective, to stop them from being paid because of the difference in vendor number. You can't really factor that into the equation to stop something or halt the payment because the vendor numbers are different. And this is definitely a big area, big root cause of duplicates when this occurs. Next, and is going to be another really kind of big area for duplicate payments, is going to be when we have invoice entry errors. And invoice entry errors in a more general sense can really happen across every available invoice header field. So if we take a step back and look at, just kind of imagine an invoice copy, and we've got on that copy an invoice number, an invoice date, a purchase order, a gross amount. All of these things are what we refer to as header level versus detail level, which is going to be the actual line item details that make up that full gross amount, and that the invoice number corresponds to all the different, item numbers involved on that invoice. So when we focus in on the header level available columns, if we just kind of use invoice number as the example, we really will see from an entry error perspective, we'll see a couple of key scenarios that are really the root cause of these duplicates, where we've got invoice number values that are contained in one another. So let's say for an invoice, one invoice is the correct invoice number involved. We'll just use the example of 12345. But for whatever reason, an extra digit is added to that 123456, where both values are contained in one another and ultimately both end up getting paid. Another very common scenario is where there's transpositions involved, where the invoice number values aren't necessarily contained in one another, easy enough to query on, but there's a transposition in those numbers that causes both invoices to be paid. So again, using the invoice number example of 1234, we'd be looking at 1234 and 12034, or where an alphanumeric character is in place of the zero. Those transpositions happen often from an entry perspective, and are also, very, very tricky to identify from an edit standpoint. And another scenario we see that kind of falls into the entry and invoice entry area are going to be scenarios where the same exact values of the invoice number are used. So we've seen where invoices are submitted under their correct invoice number, everything gets paid, but they were turned around and submitted erroneously, completely backwards. So invoice number 12345, and the duplicate was invoice number 54321. Well, we have ways in our analysis to determine what the values of each digit are, and we can, get to that information that way. But ultimately, that does go back to an invoice entry error. And interestingly enough, we do the same. We see the same duplicates occur, not just because of invoice numbers. I was focusing on invoice numbers in the in the examples, but again, any header level type value that's available, these entry errors can happen, and we see duplicate payments occurring as a result. Let's see. So the next item we've got are situations where manual invoices from EDI capable vendors are submitted and subsequently paid. If a given client is allowing vendors to submit invoices manually, that's always going to be a good potential area for duplicate payments to occur, let alone if these vendors are EDI capable. On the EDI side of things, we'll see where invoices are transmitted. Typically these are going to be paid via, whatever the vendor's terms are in the system. And there's usually, a net 30, net 45 days until these invoices are turned around and paid once they're transmitted, assuming there's no errors with the transmission and things like that. What commonly happens is the actual invoice copy is provided to the client for payment during that time, in that window of once the invoices are transmitted. And what'll happen is, an invoice copy gets emailed, it shows as unpaid, and AP turns around and pays it. But that invoice was already transmitted via EDI, and a certain 10, 15 days later, it gets paid under the normal channels. And we'll see that occur quite a bit, where if it is a possibility for manual invoices to be paid. Another
Elias,
scenario.
To jump in real quick on that one, I would imagine, and this may be applied to multiple of these examples, but I would imagine that would be, happening at a higher frequency when there's a new implementation, maybe an initiative to push more activity to ADI for the first time. And, there's kind of old systems in place, and then suddenly new systems are, the idea is you hope it all shuts off in the old system and the new system just takes over, but life's really that way. Is that something you see?
Definitely. That's a great example of when that can kind of crop up. It's kind of like, okay, well, let's get everything as current as we can. Send us what you have that's out there, kind of a thing, right?
Great. Yep.
Definitely. Let's see. So when we look at similar to kind of manual invoices are situations where if a client has the ability to pay invoices from both a statement and invoices, this is very similar in nature, in that we have vendors who will utilize their statements or their age trial balances to show a client what they consider as open and unpaid. Well, the problem with that from a duplicate payment perspective is that a lot of times what the vendor shows doesn't line up with what's in the system and what the client shows. So although it isn't paid at the moment where they're reviewing the statement, that doesn't mean that it hasn't been submitted and it's not queued up to be paid. So a lot of times you'll see that happen, where invoices are manually input or taken directly from a statement, queued up for payment and paid, where for whatever reason, we've got the invoices that have already been transmitted and they're subsequently paid, and that's kind of how a duplicate payment occurs from there. And again, similar to the manual invoice scenario. However, the real impetus behind this one is where the statement or the age trial balance is involved. And the last bullet point on this slide is another great kind of area for duplicate payments to occur, and that's where we see decentralized payment errors. P card is a great example there, where we've got a P card being utilized. It's paid as it should be. The transactions, the invoices, quote unquote, are paid, and for the how it kind of manifests itself, those same transactions show up on the AP side and are paid via AP. Causing the duplicate payment there. We've got also another, area we see, especially in the retail world, are where we have the ability to pay invoices at the store level. or we have the ability to pay invoices via like an online portal, and along with a centralized AP. So we're going to see the stores paying invoices that were already submitted for payment via the centralized AP channel, along with invoices being submitted for payment via an online portal, and for whatever reason they were already kind of submitted, queued up to be paid, and subsequently paid. Duplicate payment happened that way. All right, and let's see. So on our next slide here, a few more bullet points, a few more root causes to kind of cover. We've got another interesting area is where installment or incremental payment errors occur. And a good example here is where we see annual installment, kind of a payment where 12 monthly payments are to occur, but we see 13 payments that were ultimately issued. They don't necessarily stand out exactly as some of the other scenarios we've covered. However, because of the nature of that installment, we do see those stand out that way. Another scenario is where we have lump sum type payment errors, incrementally paid and then lump sum paid. This happens quite a bit, and this can be due to how the invoices are submitted. Let's say the invoice gets submitted in its full amount, just using the example of $1,000. Then, for whatever reason, the invoice gets submitted again, but it's submitted under $250, $250, and $500. The duplicate occurs that way across those different amounts, or across those different installments where there's even one extra installment. Sometimes your installments obviously aren't always going to line up in 12 versus 13. It could be 6 versus 7. It could be 10 versus 20, and so forth. But nonetheless, we definitely see the root cause coming back to installment and the lump sum versus incremental payments. On a kind of more of a deeper dive perspective, we'll see where duplicate line items across invoices are paid. And if we go back to the line item detail on a given invoice, this is where the actual line item detail is duplicated across other invoices, where we may or may not kind of queue that up or see that as potential duplicate based on the header level information. But what really causes the dupe is the line item detail being duplicated itself. In a lot of cases on the AP side, we will identify these. We're able to identify these kind of scenarios utilizing other data elements besides AP, where, if we look at like purchase order information, receipt information, sometimes we can queue those up and those stand out a little more. But that's definitely one of the root causes out there where the duplication occurs on the line item side of things. A big area for duplicate payment auditing is going to be, and as Ben had touched on earlier, is going to be where we have conversion related duplicates. We've got ERP conversion related duplicates here on the bullet point. But a big challenge anytime a given client is going through a system conversion is getting the old system to line up with the new system. So that's all of our old system rules, regulations, edits, how invoices are submitted. How does that play out in the new system, in the new world? And in most cases, there's a lot of complex changes and differences and subtleties that really aren't truly understood at the time of the system conversion. So at the point of the time leading into the conversion, there's usually a window where both systems are used. And in this window is when we'll see typically lots of duplicate payments occurring, where both invoices, a given invoice is paid via the old system and via the new system. I know from our experiences, we've seen where vendors were told to import invoices into the new system. So very similar to the scenario you had mentioned, where a given range of invoices were actually just imported from the old system into the new system, and the duplicates occurred because they had already been paid. The proper identification and proper checks and balances weren't made to determine if the invoices were actually paid in the old system, and they were all imported and paid via the new system. So we'll see that pretty frequently. Duplicate payment auditors love to hear that there's a system conversion involved. That typically tells us that, yeah, there's going to be good potential for some payments to be out there. And lastly, we have an area specific to duplicate repayments. So this is going to be around refunds. Refunds when a client basically issues lots of deductions and chargebacks against their vendors. This happens with lots of frequency for numerous reasons. Shortages is a great kind of easy example to throw out there where, we show that the full invoice, whatever was on the invoice wasn't received in its entirety, and we're going to issue a deduction to true up what we paid. We paid the full amount, didn't receive the full amount. Well, that's fine and good, and that happens with a lot of frequency. But what can happen in the world of duplicate payments is that we'll identify where more than one refund is issued for that same cause. So what can happen in that same example is that a repayment can be issued. Typically, especially on the retail side of things, we'll see certain codes that are associated with why repays are issued. These can get very granular. There can be, hundreds of different codes involved, or they can be more general where, there's 5 different codes involved, whatever the case is, and repayments can be issued using the wrong codes and doesn't get recognized, and then it's issued again under the correct code. We'll see this in the data where we'll have an invoice being paid, we'll have a chargeback being issued, and then we'll show 2 more positive entries. I was going to say invoices, but typically these aren't invoices. These are refunds. But in the duplicate payment environment, these manifest themselves in the same way, where we show there's still money due even though there was a correction issued. This happens with quite a bit of frequency. This can happen across the different departments, different departments being involved on these repays, depending on what the root cause of the chargeback was, why the chargeback was issued itself. You'll have multiple departments, multiple divisions involved, and vendors working with them and getting the correct information to them, getting it repaid via both channels. This is kind of interesting too, because in the world of repayments, every single bullet point we've touched on, if that's going to be our invoice entry errors where we have contained in values and transpositions, if we have, different scenarios where different amounts are involved, we'll see that all there. So it's very similar, some crossover here in this repayment world, but nonetheless, it happens with quite a bit of frequency, and it's definitely one of the root causes we look to identify.
Great. Thank you, Elias. I'll go ahead and take back the discussion here as we kind of jump into effective prevention of duplicates. So what we're hoping to do with this part is kind of talk through what we've seen organizations do to really put a dent in preventing duplicate payments. Obviously, these online events, we don't want them to be sales pitches. And so we're not talking about necessarily our services, but our background comes from the recovery audit world. And so, with that context, we want to kind of highlight and walk through what we see organizations do, and also kind of, when you and your organization should, use these different methods. So the first one is a post-payment recovery audit service. So this is obviously, what Elias does on a daily basis. A post-payment recovery audit service is when you're looking at a historical overbillings. So in that sense, it's not preventative. But Elias will go in and he'll look at, if we're in 2022, he'll look at 2021. And as a person who does this, like I said, eats and breathes this stuff, he's able to identify things. In some cases, he has some clients that have been doing this for 30, 40 years, doing audits on duplicate payments, and he's still able to identify, things that slip through the processes. A post-payment recovery audit, this is probably more if you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on your duplicate payments, but you think there's some stuff out there. The benefit and prevention for the post-payment recovery audit is is moving forward. So if Elias goes through and he performs an audit for ABC Corporation, just like he's walked through those different, I think there's like 8 different categories, and there's more than are listed there. He'll be able to do that at the end of an audit for clients he does the work on, and be able to tell them, hey, this is where stuff's occurring. This is where the errors are happening. And that information can be used to then plug those holes. The next area that we want to talk about is a prepayment recovery audit service. So post-payment, again, Elias would look at 2021 right now, for example. Prepayment actually, if you have 30, well, I guess 90, 60, or even 30-day terms, a prepayment recovery audit, the idea is to look at things more in real time and prior to the payments going out. Lots of benefit on this side, obviously. One, the error never occurs. Two, I think there's a little bit less friction with a supplier, with a vendor, when you're trying to, have them correct an invoice as opposed to claw money back, which would be more common in a recovery audit in the post-payment world. So in this world, either daily is ideal, but, weekly, and in some cases you can make it work monthly. Data is being fed to a recovery audit firm or to an internal department who specializes in this. And they are reviewing and trying to kick up potential duplicates prior to payment going out and prior to the time period where the terms become effective. This is kind of a synergy between the services and the software. In most prepayment recovery audit environments, you're using both software and labor. So you're going to have software that is there to pick up whether or not duplicate payments are occurring or are about to occur, and then auditors to verify it. So if it's an external firm, the goal of the external firm is to make sure that what the software is kicking up is valid, so that it doesn't waste client time. If it's an internal team performing this work with the help of software, the goal of the internal team is to make sure that claims or rejection of invoices isn't occurring in instances that it shouldn't. So that's kind of our whole recovery audit, framework for stopping duplicate payments. We started with that not because that's where we think organizations should start, but that's just because that's where we come from. Other items, moving into the 4th bullet point, ERP optimization for duplicate prevention. So if you're to the point, using whatever Oracle or SAP, whatever ERP you're using, is it optimized to actually stop duplicates? It's very common that Elias's work and his team's work results in finding items that could be fixed by existing tools in our client environment, meaning their ERP itself does have the functionality to be able to make sure those things aren't occurring, but it hasn't been optimized. And so as you're looking at, these 4 items, and we'll have some more on the following slide, it's what initiatives as an accounts payable or an accounting professional should me and my organization be focused on. If your ERP isn't to the point, where it's kind of picking up the stuff it should pick up, probably want to do that before jumping into the recovery audit, recovery audit realm. If there's limited, if there's limited capacity, which there almost always is. I mean, you can always do all the above. That's ideal, but very rarely do people and organizations have the time to do that. So recovery audit services, ERP optimization, vendor master optimization and reviews is actually pretty big. If you think of the stuff that Elias just walked through, just having a good, clean vendor master file where where Ben Evans Corp and Ben Evans Company are one entity, if they're supposed to be one entity, is very valuable. So making sure you have the right contact information in your vendor master for questions, making sure that you have prevented the same vendor from being duplicated within that environment, making sure that you don't have any fraudulent vendors. Very small percentage of what Elias finds relates to fraud, but that does occur sometimes. So, making sure that there's not, inappropriate vendors that are inside that master file. So that's another initiative, right? And I think, the ERP and the vendor master optimization are things that can be looked at, prior to performing a recovery audit, or in some cases, if the capacity is not there, use the recovery audit process to be able to inform what to do in a vendor master or ERP optimization. The next one, and I think this is probably the first place to start, depending on the size of your organization. We have a pretty diverse group that registered for this online event. A lot of our clients are in that, $500 million a year of revenue up to, Fortune 10 type companies. And this is something they're far past. But some of the participants that registered for this online event might be in an environment where you don't have a purchase order process implemented. That is, if you're not there, that's a great place to start. Getting a PO process implemented. If you have a PO process implemented, is it optimized? Is it working effectively? Can payments take place when a PO doesn't exist? Or can payments take place at incorrect amounts based on existing POs? If either of those two or both of those two are the case, taking the time to optimize your PO process can give you a lot of juice for the amount of effort that goes into it. There's also, we go to a lot of conferences to talk about our services and our software and such. And a lot of these, AP, P2P, and accounts payable, accounting type conferences, there's a lot of different organizations, and we're not, gonna say, which ones we think are better or worse, that offer ERP integrations. So not the actual ERP system functionality, but tools that either are plugins or tie into your ERP that have a specific focus on stopping duplicate payments and often erroneous payments as well. So, these 8 different categories, going back post-pay audit, prepay audit, prepay software, ERP implementation and optimization, vendor master optimization and reviews, purchase order process implementation and optimization, and then ERP integrations with duplicate prevention capabilities are all areas that a company can look at to be able to say, okay, this initiative, if I were to bring this on, will help to keep some of those dollars from going out the door moving forward. And really it's looking at your organization and saying, okay, where's the easiest place to start here to keep that money from going out the door, making that step and then moving forward. Something Elias and I were talking about this morning as we're preparing for this call is just the concept that, we do have clients that have been, trying to prevent duplicate payments for 30, 40 years, meaning that they had internal teams, external teams, and these are very large companies that, and in some cases, even external teams behind their external teams, looking at these duplicate payments and other issues, but duplicate payments. And still to this day, they regularly will have duplicate payments. Now, it's a very small percentage of their total spend, but they're large organizations. And so it still ends up being very material. And I think there's a common saying, everyone has a game plan or has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think that is really probably the biggest takeaway from my conversations with Elias and with others in this space is, ERPs and all these software tools and whether you look at audits that, promise, hey, we can stop all these things. Often that kind of has an asterisk. We can stop these things in a perfect world if nothing changes, if there's not a new ERP implementation, if there's not turnover within the teams, if vendors are operating in an appropriate way, if there's not a global pandemic that sends our entire accounting team home for 6 months at the same time that all our vendors have the same stuff, if there's not a large turnover at the end of 2020. So big takeaway is no matter this is kind of approaching perfection. The goal is to get better and better and try to get less and less, but you'll never be able to fully prevent everything. So look at where you're at as an organization. If any of these, I think 7, we have 7 here. If any of these 7 initiatives, make you a little bit like, that could be something that would make a difference, that's probably the area you want to start with, and then, work your way through the rest of the process. Obviously, we're big proponents for the recovery audit process. We feel like there's very few things that, have as effective of an effect in causing duplicate payments to come down than sending someone out there and trying to go break it, trying to find out where the issues are. A recovery audit, I always view a recovery audit almost as like a penetration test is in the IT world. A penetration test, you don't know how secure your environment is until you hire people who know hacking techniques to come in and see how secure it is. A recovery auditors are the same, right? Like you don't really know how good your duplicate process is or any other payment process, or, until you hire experts whose job is to find what went wrong. So, but we're not here to sell any one approach. I think it really does make sense to kind of look at this and what fits your organization. Any add-ins there, Elias? I've been kind of on a bit of a yeah.
No, yeah, I think you touched on some really, really key good factors there. And I mean, I don't know. I think just from a bigger perspective, it's, you mentioned, the 30 plus years of this kind of being an audit and all the issues and different, scenarios and things we can throw at it, but it still keeps, coming up. And I think as long as we kind of realize how complex these payment systems can be, going down to something easy as, hey, I can override the system if I need to by doing XYZ, that's always going to create the opportunity or the potential for a duplicate payment to happen. But stepping back and just the just general complication of the systems themselves, just I think will always kind of keep us in a position where duplicate payments can occur,
Yes. Yeah, I think this is probably duplicate payments. I'd say, as I talk to potential clients, as I go to conferences, this is the area I'd say people and organizations think they have right. They don't have a problem that ends up being, oh my gosh, I can't believe that much was found, more than any other area. Right. Not because more is found here than in any other area, but because, it seems like it would be simple. But to your point, Elias, it's not, right? Like, I mean, I think everyone's just like, well, yeah, of course, I've got a system. There's no way duplicate payments are going out. Generally they are. I mean, the question is how many of them, how material is it? And, how can I improve it? But, yeah, I think this is definitely a space where most people, think we've got this covered, especially if you're a large organization. A very, very small percentage error can be a very material number. So I like that. Okay, well, kind of moving forward, we thought this would probably take about 25, 35 minutes. We're a little bit over that. So that's good. But yeah, feel free, this is everyone who's on this, I imagine, registered on the LinkedIn website. I know we had quite a bit of people come a little bit late. We send out this recording to everyone who registers. So within a business day or two. So probably by the end of day Monday, you'll have a link sent to our YouTube channel. This full recording will be there. So if you came in late, you'll be able to get the rest of it. If you ever have any questions, whether it's about recovery audit or just want us to point you in the direction on some of these other topics, whether it's with ourselves or someone else, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. As the organizer of this online event. So if you registered, you should be able to contact me that way. Our website's www.audittechsolutions.com. We have all of our webinars up there, as well as on our YouTube channel. So with that, we will go ahead and close this meeting and hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks for attending. Bye.